Rick Jinner, Accessible Development with Modern Frameworks.
Thank you also, Amy, for your presentation. It was really good to learn a bit about that. I think that sets the scene very nicely for what I'm going to talk about with modern frameworks. I think we're going to hear a lot over the next couple of days about using native elements. The web is HTML. You're certainly going to see some slides from me about this. I'll try not to harp on about it too much, but I think it's pretty critical. So I've been an engineer for a couple of decades. I've had a particular interest in accessibility and good usability for the last 10 years or so. And it's with a bit of my more recent work that I'm going to be talking about accessible development with modern frameworks. So first, I think we need to say that accessible development is hard. It is difficult, but a lot of things are difficult, especially when you're learning them new. Engineering, like any sort of building, has particular skills that you need to learn and is going to be difficult. But if you were having someone come and build you a house and the bricklayer were to turn up and say, windows are hard, you wouldn't accept it. You'd end up in a house with no windows and solid walls because part of their job that you thought was implicit is too difficult for them. So that's not acceptable or accessible. And the same has to be said for when we're doing web development. It's doing a disservice to our users, our potential users, and our businesses if we don't try and tackle some of the things that we actually need to be doing in order to be doing our jobs. One of the reasons that this is more of an issue today than maybe it has been at other points in the web's history is that it's very easy to write inaccessible code. With modern frameworks, we tend to focus on the JavaScript. Not everyone and not always, but there is a large emphasis on JavaScript. When people talk about modern frameworks, single-page applications, the things that come to mind are React or Angular or Vue. They're not so much the HTML. So the HTML sometimes is a second thought, which means it's easy to forget to ensure that it's semantic and make sure that it has things like keyboard accessibility. The frameworks and the UI libraries that we use are full of accessibility anti-patterns, so that really doesn't help matters, and the documentation is often adding to the confusion. Poor documentation, bad patterns in the libraries, it all contributes to poor accessibility. So we need to constantly be reviewing the components that we're installing that other people have written, and those that we're writing ourselves we need to be very vigilant on as well. So, sorry, you just missed that slide. Do you want to? So yeah, audio described, thumbs up to the person in the front row. So let's take an example of an HTML select box. We know that if this is a semantic element, we know that it's got a select element and some option elements. We know that most of the time it's going to be visible and rendered in the browsers. We know it will have keyboard accessibility. It will work with screen readers. We also know that if we were to add attributes in there, such as a role, maybe we want to say this is a menu, we could add that in there and know that that's going to be translated into the accessibility API and into the DOM. But the same can't be said for JavaScript. This is of course not JavaScript, it is the HTML part, but it's a component. It's Angular UI select. There is a UI select element. Nested inside that is a UI select match. Inside that is a UI select choices. And inside that is a div. For those familiar with HTML, the div is the part that we know, right? We know how a div should behave, but all the rest are abstractions. We're not sure what's actually going to happen there. Will that UI select end up being translated into a select tag? Or will this actually build something that looks like a select box but is actually an unordered list and a button? There's no way of telling. And if I do add an Aria attribute in there, will that get passed through to the browser and the accessibility API as well? Or will that be disappeared when this is transcribed? But most importantly, will this actually work? Will we be able to use this with a screen reader and a keyboard? I'm going to attempt not so much a live demo, but a browser change. I've got a video in case this doesn't work, but there we go. Magic. Okay. So I'm sorry this is a bit small, but this is an implementation of this particular select box. I had a look in the documentation in the GitHub. It pointed to a code pen or a plunker that behaves slightly differently. When I did a Google search for this element, this was the first example that came up. And I don't know about you, but documentation isn't always the first thing I go to when I want to implement something. I just put it in Google, grab the code. Right? And I hope this illustrates the danger of doing that. So I'm going to tab and focus. I can see that focus is on that select box. I'm going to hit space. It opens, which is great. I'm going to now use keyboard to change my item. Oh, it's moving the page up and down. It's not actually allowing me to select an item. Okay, well, I'll tab out of that then. Oh, no, I'll hit escape. Escape should work, right? Escape isn't doing anything. So I'll tab to the next element. Well, you might not be able to see that even if you are sighted, but it has focus on an element behind the open select box, which hasn't closed. And this isn't a particularly unusual component. This has been starred on GitHub 3,300 times. It's got 1,000 code commits from 164 developers. It's a very popular component, and it's also been archived. So having spotted this, I can't fix it. Everyone that's using this has these problems, and there's no way of fixing them now. So we have to be really, really careful and test the components that we're using. Just popularity doesn't mean that they're going to work. So how do we avoid using inaccessible components? Well, we need to understand our users. So we need to be developing our applications the same way that the clients might use them. So at the very least, I'm talking about making sure you're using a screen reader and keyboard navigation. And of course, this is no substitute for having real users testing and using your application and listening to them, but we need to be bringing that forward into our actual development. And considering other aspects as well as we go, things like the zoom and the screen resolution and the color contrast. Now, there's quite a lot to that, but the good news is there are some tools that help us automate that. I'm not going to talk too much about this. I know there's a couple of talks on this topic tomorrow. The tools don't cover anything by a long, long way, but they do help us get some of those basics right. We have linting that is great for catching semantic errors or missing attributes. And there are APIs that allow us to plug the same sort of checks into our CI so that we know that what we're building and pushing out there is also going to work. And of course, there's tools in browsers like the Chrome and Firefox DevTools and Microsoft's Accessibility Insights plugin that are all really good to help spot some of those common mistakes. But going back to using our components, the thing that I think we all have to start looking for is semantics. As I said at the beginning, a lot of people are going to be talking about the fact that HTML is the web. JavaScript gets applied on the top, but if we're not making sure that our HTML is right, then we're missing out on so much stuff. Back to our trusty HTML select box, we have a select tag and an option element, and that's going to work. If we were to change an option for a div, that's not going to work. And even as a sighted mouse user, very quickly, I will realize that this is broken. But let's go to a modern component. This is a different Angular dropdown called Angular dropdown. All the good names are gone, I tell you. We've got a button that will open a drop-down, and then we've got an unordered list that has anchors in that are the items in there. So straight away we know we've got natively focusable elements. So we can possibly assume that we're going to have some sort of keyboard navigation. Now we don't know that this is wired up to behave the same way as a select box. I don't know that cursor keys or the escape key are going to work. But maybe this isn't supposed to be a select box. Maybe this is navigation or something like that. But the problem now comes that I can swap that button for a span, and I can swap that anchor for a div, and it will still work with a mouse. I'll be able to see it look like a drop-down, I'll be able to interact with it with my mouse, but it will now have lost all of its keyboard accessibility and its screen reader function. And the bigger problem comes that although I've taken something with a good example and broken it, there are many components out there that start like this. In fact, there are many components that don't have anything other than divs and spans in them. It's a secondary thought for a lot of things, so we need to be checking that. And if this is supposed to be a menu rather than a select box, where's the information there that's telling me that? We could have a nav landmark element, for example. And the landmark elements are really, really powerful because they go together with heading tags, logical heading tags, to create a picture and a map of what our website is going to behave like, how it's supposed to be constructed. And screen readers have special shortcuts that help users jump straight to these points. So if I want to go back to my nav, I can. If I want to go to the footer or the main part, I can easily and quickly do that. What that might look like in code is I have on the screen a React component, a main component, and the first element in that is a main landmark element. So I know that that's going to be present. Within that, I have an H1, it's the start of my application, and a couple of subcomponents, which inside there they would have their own logical landmark elements and headings. And if I want them to have good headings, I can even pass that through as a property. So I know that one level nested down, I have a content view. I want that heading level to start at 2. So I can pass that through as a property and then use that to set the heading level inside that component. And then within that component, I can maybe have another nested view of the same type and pass through a heading level 3 as that initial level. And our JavaScript in single-page applications is nicely chunked up into subviews, so it's very easy to construct them with landmark elements and headings that remain very useful. And of course, a great feature of modern frameworks is that we can build custom elements and we're not restricted to them. They do give us the power to do that. But I'm going to take a little example of creating something like a checkbox. Now, I want to be able to set focus to it, so I can do that with tab index. Setting a tab index of 0 means that I can tab to that item and interact with it. But if this is going to be a checkbox, I also need to add a role of checkbox. And I'll need to set an initial value. And I'll need a good label and some good naming to just explain that this is a checkbox. I'll need to wire it all up with JavaScript to make sure it works. And I'll need to make it look like a checkbox with some style and not forget things like focus and active states and cross-browser and all of this stuff. And it's become something far more complicated. And this is a little example, but I was looking over Ben's shoulder earlier. He's got a talk tomorrow where he does a really good job of explaining how this code can be written to create custom elements and the dangers that might befall there. In nearly every case, it's better to start with those native elements. You can always build on them, and if you're worried about how they look out of the box, there's lots of reset CSS around that will set that back so you can build on it. You then get all of the implicit stuff, your keyboard interactivity, the accessibility information that's implicit in the roles, states, and properties. And you don't need to worry about the things that get forgotten, like focus styling. And another great feature of modern frameworks is the way the content changes. We don't need that full screen refresh. But in the absence of those traditional page reloads, we need to manage the user's focus to guide them through the application. And this isn't just on when you're changing the whole page. This is for all sorts of different situations. You've got the view updating, but items can be toggled or removed from the DOM. We have modals. There's lots of situations where you might need to tell someone that can't see this that some content is changing on the screen. Let's take an example of a multi-page form or a wizard. You might have a title at the top and a description about what this form does, some interactive content, in this case a question, and then some navigation. We're going to have a next button to move to the next question. Interacting with that next button can do a couple of things. Well, first, we're hoping it moves on to a new question. So we may be just changing that question text. But what are we doing with focus? If the focus is left on that button, the screen reader user doesn't know that there's any change happening on the screen. So we would need to do something about that. Or worse still, the next button disappears or gets replaced by a different next button, and now focus is completely gone. So as a screen reader user, I'm left lost and have to now navigate through the rest of the page to find out what content might have changed. It's a far nicer user experience to set that focus to the beginning of that changed content. In this case, the question. So you can change the answer from the best Australian city being, not Sydney, but Melbourne, obviously. And a little bit of what that might look like in code. If we return to our React component, I might want to set focus to my main landmark element. So here comes a good use of tab index. We can set it to -1, which means that I'm not accidentally going to tab to it. It's not something that I can tab to, but I can programmatically set focus with some JavaScript. So if I'm clicking on a bit of navigation, I might want to close that navigation and then set focus with a native JavaScript command. And you can tie this into your navigation component, or you can tie it into the router so that when things are dynamically changing, when your state is changing, this is automatically handled. And of course, if we are updating the whole view, let's not forget to update our HTML titles and descriptions. This is great for SEO, but it's also really important for someone that wants to see or hear about what different tabs they might have open. We want to be able to read out those things. And again, this can be tied into the router, taking properties directly from the router in some frameworks or from another config. This is an Angular example, and they have the title service that makes it very, very easy to set, but all frameworks will have some examples of how to do this. Another type of view update is a modal. Typically, someone will interact with maybe a button on a page, and a modal will open up. The background content will be grayed out, and that modal will have some information and an action inside it. And when you go to install a modal, a component maybe, it will probably come with an example of what that modal, what the HTML might look like. I'm showing an example on the screen of the React Bootstrap modal. So we want to make sure that that content is semantic. Right? Number one thing we should be doing. I can see that we've got a button tag in there, so I know that there's going to be a button that should have keyboard accessibility. But there's also a close button directive. I don't know what that's going to be translated to. That might be a button, or that might be an anchor, or it might be a div with an on-click. We have something called modal.title. Is that going to be a title element? If so, what hierarchy is it? Do I want it to be a title element? We need to think about what we want the shape of the HTML to be when we're going to install something like this. We also want to make sure that it behaves correctly. So with a modal, that means we want the focus to be set. Oh, we want the slides not to be reset. I'm going to blame Gremlins. Okay. So in this case, we want to make sure that the focus is set inside that modal. Sorry, excuse me while I get my notes back up. No, can't find them. It's all right. I know it. I know it. Don't worry. I wrote it hours ago. So we want to make sure that the focus is, now my navigation isn't working. There we are. The focus is set into the modal, and we can focus on every element inside that modal. We want to make sure that other keyboard actions are wired up, like an escape key would close it. We want to make sure that the navigation is captured within that modal as well. And critically, that means that we don't allow someone to accidentally select some content of a background element that they shouldn't be able to interact with. That last point is worth dwelling on because it can be a little tricky. Everything that is visually grayed out and disabled needs to be literally disabled. This is not just for modal windows, but for any time that you create a little an active element, an active part of the page, so side navs or tabs. And there's several steps that traditionally we'd need to go through. First up, we need to set a focus trap to keep the focus within that active content. But that's not always enough, especially for mobile screen readers. We also need to walk the DOM and put a tab index of -1 on every other element that we don't want to be able to be focused, to remove it from the tab order. And we also need to hide it from assistive technology with an Aria hidden equals true. And this can be quite complicated on large and complex pages. But there might be another way. The HTML5 inert attribute is being reproposed through web standards. And what that means is that when a node is inert, the user agent must act as if it's absent. And most importantly, it should be hidden from assistive technology. So it also can't be overwritten further down the tree. So it's as simple as setting one attribute at the top level, and that will disable all of the content. But it needs a polyfill. I still think this is probably easier than walking the DOM. But I've talked a lot about focus, but that isn't always the only thing that you want to do. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. For example, we don't want to move the user's focus away if they're in the middle of doing a job. And we might want to announce a change as well as setting focus. We might want to say that something has changed or that a modal has opened and set the focus within it. And that's where Aria Live regions come in. An Aria Live attribute can be applied to any HTML element. And what that means is screen readers will be made aware of any changes that happen within that element. And you can use it then as a screen reader announcement center. It has a couple of different properties. You can set them to have a role of alert or a role of status. And essentially, an alert will announce updates immediately, whereas status will wait until the next graceful opportunity, such as at the end of a sentence. These also have Aria attributes, Aria Live Assertive and Aria Live Polite, which do the same thing, but will maximize your compatibility if you're using both. There's a few things to remember with them. You don't want to disrupt the user's flow with too many alerts. They're a bit tricky, more so than some of the other things we've been talking about, so you will need to test them thoroughly. And you have to make sure it's present at the start of the page load and not hidden. Otherwise, the screen reader won't know to listen to that area. There's also a few tricky quirks where they won't always announce things. And this is often by design. They won't announce repeat updates to an Aria Live region. So if you had an autosave, for example, that's often announcing autosaved or saved, it's not going to announce that. So you might need to use two regions and bounce between them. And there's components that will do that. There's plugins that will do that. So here are a few final thoughts that I don't think I have time to read out. Oh, I've got plenty of time. I'll go back and redo some others with some more fluff. Most critically, find out what HTML is being rendered in your components. If you don't like it, you have the option of finding a different component or changing it. If it's open source, you can change it and contribute back. If it's not, maybe you fork it and have to weigh up whether that's something that you're now going to own. Use native elements where you can. And remember the helpful things like landmark elements and heading levels, which works so nicely with the structure of single-page applications that are already chunked into different views and templates. Make sure while you're developing, do the testing, because it's far cheaper to find it out when you're hacking something together than it is to go back and fix later. And test your Aria Live functionality thoroughly. And I think the last one for me is very important. There's a great community here, but there's also a really, really good community outside of this room for all developers. If you find good components, then talk about them and share them. And I'm not afraid of shaming bad components either. I think we should talk about the good things that we find and make sure that we're using more of them. Thank you very much. If you'd like to stay in touch, you can follow me at Rick Jinner. I will be doing a workshop with all of this going into much more detail next year. You can register for that at bit.ly/A11Y-SPA. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Rick.